Hey, this is a video for users of the Roland TD-27 module, particularly those running the most recent version 2.10 update, and more specifically for my customers who have bought any TD-27 custom kits from the eDrum Workshop store. It's taken a while for me to spot this, but thanks to a couple of customers reaching out, I've identified some bugs that affect every TD-27 kit that I sell, but one of these bugs really noticeably affects one kit in particular. This is an unfortunate case of deja vu. Now, last time an update broke my kit, I was able to work on the fix, update the files and send new ones out. The problem this time round though is that saving a new version of the files on software version 2.1 doesn't fix the bugs. They still happen when loading the kits on this software version. So right now I literally cannot send you new kit files that are fixed. Instead, I'll run through some simple fixes that you can quickly dial in to solve the majority of the problems. In the meantime, I'm going to file a bug report with Roland and try and get this fixed at a software level. As always, my explanation of the issue is to the best of my knowledge and from my experience using the module extensively, but of course not as somebody who actually develops the modules themselves or anything like that. So first, it would be best to check your module's software version. Go to System, Info, and in the first Program tab, you'll see the program version number. If you're still on version 1 software, this shouldn't affect you. Just make sure that you install the version 1.10 files that are also included in the download folder. If your module is running version 2.00, you shouldn't be affected either. The main set of files in the download were created on this version and will work as intended. Now normally I would advocate for updating your module when a new version becomes available, but in this case if you're happy on version 2.0 and you don't need the added DWE drumlink support, then there's a chance that you might want to hold off on the update until a fix is implemented for this. If you're running version 2.10, this will likely affect you. To complicate matters though, it only seems to be affecting my kit when they're loaded from the provided .td0 kit files through the one kit load menu. This is the main way to install my kits, so if your module is already on 2.1 before you buy my kits, you'll be affected. However, if you installed the kits on version 2.0, then updated your module and the kits were either still on the module or you've loaded a backup that you created on version 2.0, this issue probably won't affect you either. For some reason, it doesn't appear to affect module backups created on 2.0 or 2.1, only loading the individual kit files specifically to version 2.1. Now, both of these bugs that I'm going to get into affect every kit on the store, but this first bug is heavily affecting the Divine Lamb B kit from the Famous Metal pack. In the Kit Edit Master Comp menu, the mix balance setting is not loading correctly. Every kit that I've loaded on version 2.1 has reset this setting to D0W100. So that's 0% dry signal and 100% wet signal. On most of my kits, I do dial in a bit of the dry signal, but the effects of this bug on the overall sound would be quite minimal. The Divine Lamb B kit, however, uses parallel compression, and normally the settings here should be D70W30, so 70% dry signal, 30% compressed signal. When this is loaded incorrectly, this is what happens. So if you're experiencing this problem and you need to restore the Divine Lamb B kit to how it should sound, highlight Mix Balance and then use the dial to change the values to D70W30. This will fix that issue entirely for this kit. For basically every other kit that I sell on the store, I usually dial in somewhere between 5 and 15% of the dry signal. So rather than list every individual setting for every kit, I'll keep things simple. I'd say setting this to D10W90 would be the best sort of average for all of them. The next bug affects all of my kits, but it might exhibit to different degrees depending on the sounds used. I think you'd feel it most on instruments with added samples, so that's the snare on pretty much every kit. But other kits with more samples like the EDW Originals Premium or the EDW House kit might be affected more due to the high number of samples across more pads. In the Kit Edit, Instrument, Sub-Inst menu, the fade end setting is not loading correctly. It's being changed from the values that I've saved to a value that is exactly 40 higher than the value of the fade point setting. So this is typically causing my samples to fade in too early, which means you get a more prominent machine gunning effect when you're playing loud and fast. This issue also happened previously when loading version 1 files on version 2 software, so I have covered this before, but I'll run you through the fix again with some average settings that should work well for the majority of instruments. So go to Kit Edit, Instrument, Sub-Inst. For any instruments that are set to layer type Fade 2, go down to the fade end setting. Don't adjust the fade point, this setting is being correctly loaded. Ensure that H and R is enabled here, the button will be white and this will affect both the head and rim. Then, for snare drums, if you're using the digital snare with the USB connection, set the fade end value to somewhere around 127 plus 10. If you're using an analog snare with a jack connection, set this to 127. For kick drums, set the fade end value to around 100. For the toms, set the fade end value to around 110. On the EDW House kit, TCJ Bop or slated room kits, for the auxiliary wires off snare instruments, set the fade end value to 127. For the cymbals of the EDW House kit, set the fade end value to 127. Now again, a lot of my kits have very specific values dialed in, but these settings should get you very close to how they were intended without the need to dial in a custom setting for every individual kit. Another part of this bug that might affect kits that you've made yourself is that the layer type in this menu automatically resets to fade 2 if you were using the X-fade or crossfade setting. I don't use this setting on any of my kits, so my kits shouldn't be affected by this specifically, but if you've used it on your own kits, you'll need to change it back. It was discovering this that led me to what I believe is going on here. So this is the end of the bug fixes for my kits. If that's all you came for, thank you for your patience with this issue. If you're interested in a little bit more detail about how I tested this and what I think is causing it, then stick around. The master compression mix balance, sub-instrument fade end, and the layer type crossfade settings were all added with the version 2.0 update. These features didn't exist on version 1. At the same time, sub-instrument layer type fade 3 was removed, because it was now redundant thanks to the new fade end setting. When I originally updated my module from version 1 to 2, I believe all of the master comp mix balance settings were set as D0W100. This default value made sense because the previous version only had the ability to use a wet signal in the compressor. On top of this, any version 1 kits that I'd saved with the sub-instrument layer type fade 3 would load to version 2 with the layer type fade 2, and the fade end value was set 40 higher than the saved fade point. The exact same settings that are exhibited in this bug. So my best guess is that for some reason the version 2.1 software is ignoring the values for the settings that were added in 2.0, which then causes them to be set to a default value. This idea is further strengthened by the fact that the X-fade setting swaps to fade 2. Crossfade wasn't a function on version 1, so the value for it isn't loading correctly. Now there is an exception to this, but I also believe that this really reinforces the theory. So the ability to use transient controls with user samples was also added with the version 2.0 update. Previously, transients could only be applied to stock instruments, not samples. These settings don't appear to be affected by this bug. As far as I can tell, they're loading correctly to version 2.1 from .td0 kit files that were either saved on version 2 or 2.1. When I first updated my module to version 2, some of the kits I'd created on version 1, with user samples on the snare drum, appeared to have the transient switch enabled in the sub-instrument menu, with the release depth set to 34. This wasn't intentional, and at first it seemed to be random and only affected certain kits. Many didn't have the transient switch enabled, or have any values dialed in at all. Eventually though, I realised that these kits had been created by copying a snare in from a different kit, one that originally used an internal instrument on the sublayer and that had the transient switch turned on with a release depth of 34. So I'd swapped the sub-instrument on the copied snare to a user sample, but I hadn't edited any of the transient settings. This wasn't a problem on version 1 because the transient switch wasn't available for the user samples on that version. The setting was effectively automatically turned off, but there wasn't actually an off setting applied, it was just unavailable. Once transient controls were enabled for user samples on version 2, these settings were seemingly restored completely unintentionally, and it caused a pretty nasty problem. So again, my best guess here is that the reason that the other settings, the mix balance, layer type and fade end, are being affected is the same reason that the transient settings aren't being affected on 2.1. The values associated with these settings actually still existed on the module. Therefore, they're still being read or loaded by the version 2.1 software, unlike the settings that were only added on version 2.0. I've painstakingly checked all of the other parameters on my kits, and I don't believe that any others are affected at all. What I can't confirm is whether or not version 2.1 is saving these values to a TD0 kit file that it creates. I can only confirm that it's not loading them correctly from any software version. I'm passing on a written version of this bug report as well as a video showing various ways that I've loaded the kits to confirm which settings are affected and in which scenarios. Fingers crossed it's quite a simple fix and I'll have a positive update for you soon. Thanks again for your patience on this matter, thank you for watching, and thank you for your support in general whether you've bought kits or not. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers!